When 34-year-old Claire Monroe received a letter from a small-town law firm in rural Maine, she thought it was a mistake. She didn't know anyone there. She had no family in that part of the country, no relatives left alive, or so she believed. The letter was simple: "You've been named in the will of Margaret Vale. Please contact Dawson and Heller Law Associates at your earliest convenience." Claire had never heard that name before. But that letter, it would soon lead her down a path she could never have imagined, a path lined with secrets, guilt, and a truth that had been buried for decades. Some inheritances change your life. Others reveal who you truly are. Claire Monroe was the kind of person who liked order. She worked as a medical researcher in Boston, spent her weekends reading, and kept to herself. After losing both parents at a young age, she had grown used to being alone. So when the attorney on the phone told her she had inherited an estate, an entire house, from a woman she had never met, she almost laughed. But curiosity has a strange pull. 2 days later, Claire packed her car and drove north. The highway faded into winding backroads, the trees growing denser with every mile. A sign appeared: "Welcome to Fairhaven." Population, barely over 300. Rain began to fall as she reached the coast. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond a cliff, and at the edge stood the Vale estate, tall, gray, and silent. Its windows were shuttered, its garden overgrown, its walls streaked with decades of salt and wind. A man stood waiting by the gate, Mr. Holloway, the caretaker. He must have been in his 70s, with sharp blue eyes that didn't blink much. "Mr. Holloway," gruffly. "Miss Monroe, I presume?" "Claire, yes. You must be the caretaker." Mr. Holloway, caretaker, groundskeeper, whatever's needed. Didn't expect anyone would ever come back here. There was something in his tone, not surprise but dread. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and dust. Every corner felt preserved, like a museum frozen in time. Portraits of stern men and delicate women lined the walls, their painted eyes following her as she walked. The will was straightforward. Margaret Vale had left Claire the house, the land, and its contents. No explanation, no conditions. But in the study, something caught her attention. On the top shelf sat a faded book, The Vale Legacy. It was hollowed out, and inside lay an envelope sealed in red wax. Claire opened it carefully. Inside were several old letters, dated 1972. Each was written in elegant cursive and signed Evelyn. The letters spoke in riddles. "The night of the storm changed everything. We promised to keep it buried. If anyone ever finds this, forgive me." The next morning, Claire returned to town. She wanted answers. The lawyer, Elliot Heller, confirmed the paperwork was real. Margaret Vale had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving no children, no spouse, no living relatives, except apparently Claire. But when Elliot checked the archives for any connection between Claire and the Valles, he found something disturbing. Elliot, interview tone: "I found an adoption record from 1989, filed right here in Fairhaven. The name listed for the child was Claire Monroe. It was sealed, but the paperwork traced back to the Vale family." Narrator: "That was the moment everything shifted. The inheritance wasn't random. It was personal." Back at the estate, Claire began searching every room. Behind the grand staircase, she found a locked door leading down to the basement. The air was thick and cold. There, under a sheet, she discovered a wooden chest, its hinges rusted, its lock broken with age. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them. Children playing in gardens, family picnics by the sea, weddings frozen in time. And then, one photograph that made her heart stop. A little girl, around 5 years old. Same dark hair. Same birthmark on her shoulder, the same as Claire's. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, Evelyn Vale, 1977. The letters. The name. The resemblance. Evelyn Vale wasn't just someone in the family history. She was the family history. Among the photos was an old newspaper clipping. It read, "Local girl missing. Police search for Evelyn Vale, last seen during the 1972 coastal storm." Claire did the math. If Evelyn had disappeared in 1972, and she herself had been adopted in 1989, what happened in between? She dug deeper into the chest and found something wrapped in oilcloth, a small box containing a locket, a ring, and another sealed envelope. Inside, a single line written by hand: "Some things are better left under the roses." The only roses she'd seen were in the overgrown garden behind the house. Claire needed context. She began asking around town. Most people had never heard of the Valles, or pretended not to. But an elderly woman at the general store gave her a name: Helen Marsh, a retired nurse who once worked at the old Fairhaven hospital. When Claire met Helen, the woman's hands trembled as she poured tea. Helen Marsh, softly Margaret Vale. She wasn't a bad person, dear. But she carried a burden. Evelyn wasn't her daughter, she was her sister's. The father wasn't who people thought. Claire, what do you mean? Helen, Elizabeth Vale, Margaret's sister, was pregnant with Evelyn. But the father was a married man from town. There was a scandal brewing, and then the storm came. Narrator, Helen paused. Her eyes filled with tears. Helen Marsh, that night, there was shouting at the estate. The lights went out. By morning, Elizabeth was gone. They said she left during the storm, but I never believed that. Margaret took the child in, and by the time anyone asked questions, Evelyn was gone too. Narrator, Helen handed Claire an envelope she had kept hidden for years. Inside was a birth certificate. Evelyn Margaret Vale, born 1972. Mother, Elizabeth Vale. Father, name blacked out. But at the bottom, faintly written in pencil, were 3 haunting words, "Forgive me, Claire." The pieces were falling into place. Margaret Vale, the woman who left Claire the house, had been living with guilt for nearly half a century. Evelyn Vale, the missing child, hadn't disappeared. She had been renamed. She had grown up as Claire Monroe. The adoption record wasn't a coincidence. It was a cover-up. Margaret had taken her sister's child and raised her in secret, away from Fairhaven, under a new identity. But what about Elizabeth Vale, the mother? What really happened to her that stormy night in 1972? Claire found the final letter Margaret left hidden in the piano bench in the parlor. It was addressed simply to "My dearest Evelyn." Narrator, reading letter. I never meant for you to find out this way. That night was chaos. Your mother came to me, begging for help. The argument turned violent. She slipped, she fell. The sea took her before I could save her. I buried her beneath the roses, to keep her close. Forgive me, my darling. I have carried this truth alone all my life. Now, it's yours to carry. Narrator, Claire's hands trembled as she finished reading. The words blurred through tears she didn't feel fall. Police reopened the cold case. Forensic teams searched the rose garden behind the house. What they found confirmed everything. Beneath the soil, near the crumbling garden wall, lay human remains. DNA tests later identified them as Elizabeth Vale. Margaret Vale had lived her final years in that mansion, haunted by the crime, waiting for Evelyn, for Claire, to come home. Detective Lauren Price, voiceover interview. When we reviewed the evidence, it was clear the inheritance was meant as a confession. Margaret couldn't live with what she'd done. She left everything behind so Evelyn could finally learn the truth. In the months that followed, Claire, or Evelyn, sold the estate. The Vale mansion stood empty again, silent as the ocean below. She kept only the letters. The ink faded more with each passing day, but the truth they carried never would. People in Fairhaven still whisper about the night of the storm, about the cries heard from the cliffs, about the family that disappeared into the sea. Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it waits, patiently, for someone to return home. The inheritance wasn't wealth, or property, or closure. It was a confession written in stone, sealed by blood, and uncovered by a woman searching for her name. Because in the end, some inheritances aren't gifts. They're confessions waiting to be found. Soft piano fades. Distant thunder rolls. Silence.